My name is Johnny Lopez. I'm an Office 365 architect with Schlumberger. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding the COE Starter Kit for the Power Platform. A couple of announcements that we wanted to make for this presentation, for this conference, is the SharePoint conference is now called the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference, which is in Vegas at the MGM Grand Resort on March 23rd through the 25th at 2021. You can follow that conference if you'd like. You can go to m365conf.com to get more information. I wanted to thank all the sponsors for the generous support, especially throughout the years. I've been doing community work for the last 10 years. Proficient, CoreView, AvePoint, Firma, QuizCom, Valo, Swoop, PointFire, Tygraph, and Citrosoft. Thank you guys for your support. Without them, this conference would be very difficult to do. Just to let you guys know that every 10% of the donations received by the sponsors get donated to a charity as well for relief work. With all conferences, there is a raffle. So if you're ready for a raffle, we are giving away 3 Oculus Quest all in one. You have to visit the vendor's booth sessions and watch videos. Submit your answers to pair up items to enter the raffle. You need at least 5 correct answers, then submit for a chance to win. We'll be giving away 1 Oculus in Americas, 1 in APAC, and 1 in EMEA. So from a charity perspective, consider donating to the following charity relief funds: United Way and also the International Medical Corps. Again, 10% of the funds from sponsors go to support these community relief. During this trying time in the pandemic, there's a lot of folks that need help, and we're definitely looking to help out with that and do a charity sponsorship. So at the end of the session, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the comment box. We'll get to the questions as needed. We always like feedback. Event feedback is very useful, and then speaker feedback as well. I'll actually put this slide back up at the closing so you guys can hit the QR codes and answer the feedback. And please give feedback where you can. And again, my name is Johnny Lopez. I'm an Office 365 architect with Schlumberger. I'm a community leader in Office 365. My Twitter handle is @rocket_15. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, please feel free to add me, join, and I'll follow you back. And I post a lot of good content around the community. I'm also the Houston Office 365 president for, we have a community in Houston there. We have a SharePoint Saturday, formerly known as SharePoint Saturday, but we call it HOU 365 Saturday. I'm also the chair. Really what I do is I help manage the event and coordinate folks and all that good stuff. And then I'm also one of the co-leaders for the Houston Power Platform user group in Houston. Some of the projects I've worked on in the past, I help manage and support the Microsoft 365 and the Power Platform in my organization and across the community. From building Power Apps, Power Automate, flows, UI flows, Office 365 deployments, migrations, SharePoint OneDrive migrations, on-prem to Office 365. I've done an Office 365 video and stream migration, Teams deployment, Yammer, you name it, it's been out in the books for me. Really, I'm very, very passionate about helping the community and giving my time and experience in the community. One thing about me is I served 10 years in the Navy. If you see my picture off to the right, that's me as a young guy just joined up in the Navy. I have 3 beautiful kids. I reside here in Houston, Texas, and I love fishing, I love playing softball, and I love learning. So today's agenda, the session will take a deep dive in the COE Starter Kit and explain some of the things. We're going to talk about the introduction. I'll give you an introduction of the COE Starter Kit. We'll talk about the administration components, governance, nurturing, and then some operational strategies that you can take back to your organization today and implement using the COE Starter Kit. We will not cover how to install the governance or the nurturing components due to time, but we'll give examples on how we use these today in our organization. And this session will not cover specific DevOps practices, so just keep that in mind. There's a short delay in the slides. So what is the Microsoft Power Platform? It's a low-code power platform that spans across Office 365, Azure, Dynamics, and some standalone applications. You have Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents. In conjunction with those, you have data connectors, whether they're custom or they're Microsoft data connectors, AI Builder, and there's also a common data service. The COE Starter Kit uses the common data service for a lot of entities, and you'll see this in a lot of the deployments for the COE Starter Kit, is it's heavily using the CDS to store and pull back data. So let's talk about some of the components of the Center of Excellence. So first of all, let's talk about the core component. Without this component, this COE Starter Kit will not work. And that's called the admin core component. And what that core component does, it's an all admin specific apps and flows. So it gives the admins the power to dive into what's happening and administer the Power Platform. It's really specifically for and relevant to Power Platform admins. The next component that we're going to talk about is the governance component. The governance components are very relevant to admins, but also to makers. It's extending some of the capabilities out to the Power Apps and Power Auto makers in the organization. This is very specific and relevant to these two types of roles. The third thing is nurturing. This is relevant to everyone in the organization, from admins to makers to users of apps and flows. So this is a very important component that is vital for adoption and getting feedback from your users and getting in touch with your makers, because the makers are the ones that are actually creating the Power Apps and Power Automate functions. There's two other things I'd like to talk about that's really not a component, but it's actual an extension, is the audit log connector. This connects data to the Office 365 audit log to gather telemetry data for things like unique users, who's launching an app, those different types of things. It uses a custom connector to connect to the Office 365 audit logs. And then also you have your Power BI dashboard. Well, Johnny, I've seen a bunch of Power BI dashboards out there, and some work for my organization, some don't. But this dashboard provides a holistic view with all types of visualizations and insights into the resources in your tenant. Things like environment, apps, Power Automate flows, connectors, connector references, makers, and then audit. Those are all the things that the Power BI dashboards. I'm gonna actually show you guys bits and pieces of our dashboard to give you some more insight on the power that this dashboard can provide you daily. So in this section here, we're going to talk about some things around a section of the starter kit and some scenarios and a component. So in this section, we're talking about security. How do we secure the data? How do we secure our SQL data or our data that we have IP around? How do we secure that? Or PII, those different types of things. So you have to have a DLP strategy, and then also, plus there's a part of this is for visibility. So what that is there's a DLP Editor, which is a Canvas app, and a DLP Customizer, which is also a Canvas app that is included into the starter kit. From a monitoring perspective, cataloging the tenant resources using Flow. The ones I have highlighted are the ones that we're going to talk about today. The other ones we don't get into too much because of time. But the Power BI dashboard is part of monitoring. Then also there's that custom connector for the Office 365 auto log. And then there's also a really nice app that's called the Power Platform Admin View. It's an app that's built to give you more insight on your environment. So alert in action. These are app audit example processes. So what this is there's an app that's called Set New App Owner. There's many of times in the organization where folks are developing these apps and then moving roles or leaving the organization or whatever the case is. So you start getting into the orphan app or non-usable apps. So you might want to have to set an owner or add a member or add an editor to an app. You can use this new Set New App Owner to do those administrative tasks without tapping into PowerShell. And then the evangelizing and training, encourage adoption. If you read my shirt, it says, turn your creativity on. We want to encourage them to use a platform to build better solutions for our organization. So what this package does, there's a welcome email flow. that's customizable to fit your organization. Training and a day management. There's 2 Canvas apps for that. So it is part of training the day notification was for some flows. So you can build your own training part of this into the platform. You can also have newsletters for product updates, maybe updates that you're making to the platform, those or DLP policies. Those different types of things it's built into the starter kit that you can customize and utilize. And then standards and components. What are the best practices? We turned on this solution. What are some of the best practices? Well, there's a template catalog. That's a Canvas app that allows you to actually have makers go in and add their apps to the catalog and go through a process. So you put some governance around these apps to make sure that they're not exposing things they're not supposed to, or the apps are built in from a compliance perspective, or they're built to perform. How many times have we built an app that just it can't perform based on the data that we're using? Plenty of times. So we want to make sure that there's no performance issues where users don't have a good experience. Let's jump into the core components. So the core components of the COE Starter Kit, it syncs all of your resources into entities and builds an admin app on top of that to help you get more visibility for the apps, the flows, the makers that exist in your environment. So some of the things that's out there today is the catalog tenant resources. Here's some of the components that come with the COE Starter Toolkit in the core components. The DLP Editor and Customizer. I'll show you guys an example of those later in the presentation. And then the change ownership app. It's very important to be able to change ownership of applications. There's a lot of times where we have that scenario a lot within our organization. And the governance components. So after you become familiar with your environment, so like I said before, without the core components, the COE kit does not work. You cannot install anything else without those components. So they're very key. After you become familiar with your environment and your resources, you might want to start thinking about, how do I audit these things? What are some of the processes that I can put compliance around for my apps? You might want to gather additional information about your apps from your makers, or specific audit data on your connectors or app usage. So the apps and flows that are part of this solution help you get started. The governance components solution contains assets that are relevant to admin and makers. The archive and cleanup flows, that's a really good one to use. So guess what? We have 10,000 flows and we're only running 200 in production. How do we archive these flows? There's an actual archive and cleanup flow that you can run on your environment to put some retention around these flows and apps that are not being used. There's also an admin find, where you can actually find admin and owners as the apps that leverage certain connectors flow. So, for example, if we have a connector that we need to know, if we take this connector down, what app is going to be affected or what flow is going to be affected, because we think this connector is a security risk. Well, there's a tool in there that'll help you find what other apps are related to that connector, which is really nice. So some of the components is the sample audit process. There's a developer compliance center, a Canvas app. There's a flow that runs does the compliance detail request. There's also a business flow, a process flow for auditing resources. And then the archive apps. Those are really important when you talk about governance. And then also take action based on certain connector usage. So the nurturing part comes in. This is an essential part of establishing the COE to your makers and creating an internal community. We always talk about community. How do we get a community that's involved that helps us as administrators do our jobs? Because we want to make more time to make sure that the environment is healthy. So how do we empower these makers and these other environment admins to help us do a better job on sharing best practices and templates? And how do we onboard makers? I have a new maker to the organization. There's an actual flow that runs. If someone is a new maker in the organization, it could send them an email welcoming them, saying, hey, here's some resources at your disposal. We have an app in a day training. Or here's our Yammer community that we go and post ideas and questions off of, and people answer those within the organization. The nurturing component solution, it does contain assets that are relevant to everyone in the organization, whether you're an admin, a maker, a user, or you're just an environmental admin as well. So some of the components is we can onboard new makers, provide training, share best practices, encourage adoption. That's a really big key. So after this, what I want to walk you through is setting up the core components, because without the core components, you will not be able to move on forward with the COE Starter Kit. So the first thing you want to do, some key points in this, is you want to create a new environment dedicated to this tool. This environment has no other purpose except run this tool. Make sure that when you create the environment, you add the CDS and you leave the sample apps and the data out of it. So once you do that, you create your environment. You can secure it the way you want to, whether you have an Azure AD security group that you put people into that can manage that environment. Excuse me. Download and extract the COE Starter Kit. Once you import the solution, what you do is you go to make.powerapps.com and import the solution, and you go to the home page by clicking on Solutions and Import. Once imported, you click on the solution and make sure that you publish all customizations. Very, very important to publish all the customizations. If you don't do that before you start configuring the flows that come with it, it's not going to work correctly. So remember that the admin core components has a series of flows that is running, that's going out to get information. The next thing you do is you update your environment variables. So like I said before, there's an admin email address that you can use. So there's an email address used in flows to send notifications to admins, makers, and whoever else is part of that. This should be either your email address as an administrator or a distribution list where it goes out to multiple folks. There's also an email header style where it uses CSS to format emails that are sent to admins and makers. By default, if there's just a default style, I encourage you to go out and customize that and make that part of the organization. Put your logo out there, put your branding, put your color scheme, all those good stuff to make it look applicable to your organization. And there's also a Power Automate environment variable. And you're probably like, Johnny, what's the Power Automate environment variable? It's actually provided for you. So within this screen that you see here, this is what it looks like when you go to the environment variables. So you can select each one of those and you can edit those for the environment. So the Power Automate environment variables are straightforward. If you're in the US, there's one specifically for the US, us.flowmicrosoft.com. If you're in EMEA, same thing, emea.flow.microsoft.com, and then there's one for government as well. So that's the second stage that you would want to do when you import and you start the solution. The third thing you want to do is configure the COE Settings entity. Remember, with this install, you have CDS. So get used to the term entity, because it's very important to know the entities within CDS in order for you to run this tool. So the way that you get here is, remember that Power Platform admin app that we talked about? You go to make.powerapps.com, navigate to the environment where your COE is running, and there's an app that you launch. And when you launch that app, this is what some of the app looks like. You can actually look at, you can pin apps, those different types of things. You have an overview dashboard. If you click into apps, you can see how there is a process, an auditable process for your app catalog. You can see the flows. You can look at all the environments, the connectors, those different types of things. If you click on makers, you can see all the people. You can see all the makers in your organization that are making Power Apps and Power Automate flows. And the next thing, if you click configure, what this does, this actually opens the COE settings for an entity. So once you configure the asset based on your company, your name, company name, logo, branding guidelines, support, and communication channels, you only have to do this once for the COE. Once you do that, the other tools in the application, the other solutions will point to that to get that information. So for example, once you upload this, your logo to the company logo, it's going to actually start putting your company logo in some of these solutions as well. Okay, so here's the fun part. So now you have to activate the sync template flows. You're probably like, hey, Johnny, this is a lot. It's really a lot. Actually, once you get into it and you start activating these flows, it becomes a little bit easier. But these flows are required to sync data to the resource entities that you need. So that first flow is the first one you start. It's the admin sync template v2. This is scheduled daily by default. You can change it if you want to run it every 6 hours, you want to run it every 24 hours or every 36 hours. However you want to schedule it, you can schedule it that way. But this flow syncs the environment details to the COE CDS entity for environments. So this flow will pull out all your environmental data for every environment that you have created in the Power Platform. If you don't have any environments created, you only have one. It's a default environment, and we'll talk about that here shortly. The second the second flow is actually syncs. This is automated. So once that first flow kicks off and it completes, the second flow, the sync template v2, for apps, custom connectors, flows, and model-driven apps, that kicks off. And what it does, it relies on that first flow. It triggers automatically, and it pulls in that when the environment details are created and modified in the CDS. The flow then crawls the environment resources and stores data in the Power Apps app, flow, connection, reference, and maker entities. So this is where it's pulling in a lot more information from the first environmental pool. The third one is flow action details. This is scheduled daily by default. It's separate from the first two. This flow stores all triggers and actions from all of the Power Automate flows in your tenant. Very specific to only pull in flow information. The connectors is scheduled daily by default, and this flow stores all the connector information in the CDS Power App connector entity. And the sync flow errors, this one's scheduled daily by default. If any flows fail, the failure is stored in the CDS sync flow error entity. This scheduled flow sends a report of failures to the admin. So keep that in mind. If you schedule that to run daily, you're going to get a daily report of all the flows that failed within the environment. I get it daily. I like to look at it. And if I need to take action on it, I take action. If I don't, I just delete the email and move on to the next. So again, you must establish connection for each flow before you can start them. The way you do that is you navigate to the solution to keep each flow running. So these flows have to be run in a certain order. So the first two, you have to start first. So when you add a new connection, we're required on each flow. If you're familiar with flow, you're familiar with this screen. So there's some variables. Every one of these flows have connections. So what you have to do as a GA or Power Platform admin, you have to go use that account to add to the new connections. It's a very time-consuming process. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes each flow, but it's very rewarding once you get into that. Everything else is built for you. All you're doing is making a connection, saving the flow, and when you save the flow, you go back, and once all the published customizations are there, you can actually, and the variables are met, you can turn the flow on. So you have to do it in the order in the last slide. I recommend doing it in the order of this here, so you have better continuity. So once you save the workflow, if there are more connections, you're going to get this nice little message saying that some of the connections are not authorized yet. That means you just need to click down into the flow more and all the actions and the trees for the flow. Once that's done, you click save. It will allow you to go back to the actual flow start screen. Excuse me. Okay, so let's talk about the Power Platform admin view. This is a modern-driven app that provides an interface used to browse items in the CDS custom entities. It provides access to views and forms for their custom entities in the solution. So you can review apps, flows, you can look at environments, the connectors, those different types of things. This process here is specifically around the governance process, whether it's for auditing purposes or, for example, It's one of those check-in, check-out things like, hey, did you register your app? No? Okay, well, you need to go register your app through the platform and get that set up. So this is an automated registration of the app. And you can also put, this is what puts the app completion in the app catalog as well. So once the maker completes this and adds all the pertinent data for those different types of things, you know, who owns the app, who has access, those different, and then put some notes on the app. If there's any related apps or flows on there, you can add that too as well. And you can highlight these apps in the app catalog. So when folks go to the catalog, these apps are actually highlighted. So this is that Power Platform admin view. It's an app that comes with the COE Starter Kit. The DLP Editor, this is what the DLP Editor looks like. I love this tool. I love this Canvas app. It reads and updates the DLP policies while showing a list of apps that are affected by the policy configuration. So for example, if I have 100 environments and I have 6 different DLP policies that span across, if I want to change a policy, this is going to tell me which apps break. And so, for example, we find a policy or a group of, we need to add a new connector or connection into that policy. We need to be able to find out what breaks, and we can contact the makers, the owners of those apps, and let them know, hey, look, this might be breaking. If we need to change this policy, this is going to break. We need to update the way that your app works. So use this app to make any changes to the DLP policy and see what impact each change will have. This mitigates the risk of DLP changes breaking a flow or an app by contacting the makers as well. So the permissions to use this, it can only be used by admins. Either you need to be a Power Platform Service admin or a global admin on the tenant. That is required, but you can share this with your COE admins so they can use it as well. So to run this app, you have to have a specific permission, but you can share this app specifically with folks on your team that are administrators. I don't recommend sharing this with anyone that's outside of the administration role for the platform. The next thing is a DLP Customizer. So what this is a Canvas app that you can use to add custom connectors to the business data group of a DLP policy, or you can enable the HTTP connectors to a DLP policy as well. So this is really pushing those custom connectors out to your DLP. So the DLP policies come with some standard and premium connectors connections that you can use out of the box. But when there's custom ones that you need to deploy, you can use this app to actually push them to specific policies. The permissions for this is, again, you need to be a Power Platform Service admin or a global administration, but you can also share this app with your COE admins as well. This is what the new app owner, set new app owner app looks like. Again, it's a Canvas app that admin can use to discover apps. You can actually do searching. Hey, I don't know the name of the person, but I know the app. I got a ticket in for this app that the owner left the company. I need to change the owner. You can do a search and it'll actually bring back the apps that people are makers or editors as well. And then also the name of the app, and it brings back details. So you can actually make a new owner. This is really nice where you can set an app owner or a new viewer of the app, even editors from this app, you can do that. So this app is intended to only be used by admins, the Power Platform Service admin, the global admin, or you can share it with your administration team as well. Okay, so now to the fun stuff. So I work for a company called Schlumberger. We like to empower everyone to do more. So we are the world's leading provider of technology and reservoir characterization, drilling, production, and processing in the oil and gas industry, or the services industry, the energy services industry as we call it. So Schlumberger has about 100,000 employees across 2,500 locations in 85 countries. So we have this model of citizen developer, where those are the makers, those are the folks out there in the field, whether they're engineers, whether they're IT pros, they could be financial analysts out there making these apps or flows or different types of solutions in the platform. And then we have an IT admin, which kind of the role that we play. So we're the IT admin. We manage the platform and all of its tools. We extend the capabilities of those platforms to the citizen developer. And also we have those DevOps folks. Those folks are actually heavy writing code, doing more than just what we do in the Power Platform. So they're making all these connections. They could be working in SAP or other applications outside of the Power Platform or the Microsoft ecosystem as well. So we do have a really good set of those within our organization. Okay, so let's look into the Power Platform. This is the Power BI dashboard. We talked about this. So this is our Power BI dashboard. A couple things I like to call out here. This is the Power BI dashboard that we use to find out how many environments we have, how many apps we have, how many custom connectors that we have in the organization, how many makers, total number of apps, those different types of things. Right now, we're sitting at about 124 total environments, 9 created this month. That is the month of May. 2 environment makers were promoted. So we gave 2, whether it's a user or whether it's a role account, access to create environments. We have 110 total custom connectors, over 2,500 app makers, about 11,000 apps in the organization, and around 2,000-ish flow makers, and about 10,000 flows in our organization. So this gives you a nice little overview of your data. Without that first flow that we talked about, the admin sync template, you cannot get this data. This data is being pulled by those flows that we're talking about. This is what our Power Automate overview looks like. Again, about 10,000 flows, 1,900, 2,000 makers, 9,722 UI flows that are out there today, whether they're being tested, they're being created we empower and drive innovation within our organization. And we open this up for folks to be able to use to test new technologies and really put these to test to make sure that they run efficiently within our environment. A couple of the things I wanted to point out on this dashboard is there are 3,800 stop flows. Not sure why, but now as an administrator, I look at that as like, I need to go investigate that. Why do we have 3,800 stop flows? Is it because they're orphaned? Maybe the owner doesn't have a license anymore, or they had a trial license, or they left the organization, whatever the case is. We need to go do some cleanup on that. And there's 249 suspended flows. So we want to look at that and make sure that those flows get utilized, and either we need to prune them or we need to enhance them to make them better. For the Power Apps, we have, again, 11,000 apps, 2,500 makers, 8,721 of those are Canvas apps, and 74 model-driven apps. There's one more part of this that is not shown here, but there's also another record in the entities that show you the Power Apps forms, which are those forms that sit on top of SharePoint. Those are part of this report. So keep in mind, you can see how many are there in the organization and who's creating them. Right now, there's a big push because of licensing to create things on SharePoint lists, right? Create that app and use the SharePoint list as your database, or create a Canvas app and point it to the SharePoint list, or just create the SharePoint list and create an app on top of it. Works just fine. There's a huge push for that. One of the other things that that we noticed here on the Power Apps overview, there's 502 production apps. So we have a lot of test apps, but again, we have 502 authentic production apps that have gone through the process and have been sanctioned as a production app, which is really good. Keep in mind that we have, I'm going to show you guys how our environments are broken down, and I'm going to give you guys some best practices on how to use the COE kit to manage your platform as well. So this is a little bit, I'm going to give you guys more insight on that. So the first thing we talk about is securing your tenant. So what does that mean? So our tenant is the Power Platform tenant, especially around environments and apps and flows and those different types of things. We want to talk about environment. What do we need to do for environments, right? So the environments are containers that are used and built that manage apps, flows, connections, and other assets. And also the permissions to allow organization users to use the resources. So in this case, as you can see here in this picture, that we have our Azure AD tenant, and then we have several environments. So we have dev, test, and prod on top for a very specific use case. And then the same thing across the organization, across the globe. There's all these environments out there. If you remember back in the other slide, we have over 100 environments. That's between production environments, development environments, test environments, and also community plans. And we'll talk about those in trial environments. We'll talk about those too as well. So some of the environment key facts. So when you are ready to start planning your environments out, and some of the things, the key facts that you want to think about. All environments are geographical. So they're tied to a geographic location that is configured at the time the environment is created. Keep that in mind. Another thing is environments can be used to target different audiences or different purposes, such as your dev, your test, and your production environment. So you're getting the traditional DevOps model. And then every tenant has a default environment where all the Power Apps, licensed Power Apps and Power Automate users can create apps and flows. One of the things is by default, everyone in the environment and the org can create apps and flows in that default environment. So keep that in mind. So if you wanted to restrict that, I don't recommend that. I would recommend letting it be open and putting some governance around it, applying some DLP policies, what we'll talk about in a minute, and then and make sure that your non-default environments so when you start creating these non-default environments, it offers more control around permissions. Again, in that default environment, everyone has access to create apps and flows. And then also the non-default environments is what we call them. The creation can be restricted to only global and service admins from the Power Platform Admin Center. So keep that in mind. So the environment creation can be restricted. So not everyone can create environments, but that can be restricted to a certain level. Where for today we have our Power Platform admin team, which we can create environments, and we extended that to a certain members of our DevOps team that can create environments where they need environments. And that we have some governance and we have a nice handshake agreement that they won't do anything that they're not supposed to do. So it's really nice. But you can go to aka.ms/PPAC to get to the Power Platform Admin Center. And this is kind of what it looks like. Again, this is in preview mode, but I wanted to call this out again. These settings are the applicable across your organization. So by default, who can create production environments and who can create trial environments, you can turn that on and off. One of the things that we did is we allowed everyone to create trial environments, and then we noticed the shift. We noticed that everyone was creating trial environments, but they were not being used. I think I had over 70-something trial environments that didn't have a flow or didn't have a Power App on them. So that they just created the environment and wasn't using it. So we went back through and cleaned that up to make sure that we didn't have sprawl and we didn't have erroneous data out there. So you can only specify specific admins to create the production environments and the trial environments. One of the things that I recommend from an environment perspective, if you have developers or if you have makers that want to do their own thing, offer a community plan. What that is, you can go out and anyone can go out and get a community plan, but it gives you pretty much an environment. It gives you an environment that you can work in that you can't share anything out of that environment, but it gives you your own environment where you can work in. You can access CDS. There's no licensing required. You just can't share the data outside of the environment. So keep that in mind. Community plans can help with the creation of the lack of creation for your makers. Because what happens all the time, we lock everyone out and they tend to go find another solution. So this can help enable that, hey, you want your own environment? Here's a link to a community plan and feel free to go to the community plan. The next thing is establish a strategy around environments, right? Assign your admins, your Power Platform service row admin, and give them full rights. Restrict the creation of new trial, tenant, and production environments to admins. Treat the default environment as hey, anyone can come. It's a personal productivity environment, and you bring your business groups and you rename it for sure. Rename the environment so it makes sense to your organization, but have everyone go there and if you have an Office 365 Power Apps and Flow license, sure, go ahead, create away and put your governance around it. And establish a process for requesting access or the curation of environments. That's really, really key. We have a process, we have a formal process where they have to go and put a ticket in, and we get the ticket and we do some analysis on their, we ask them questions. Hey, what do you guys need the environment for? How can we help you? Oh, no, you need an environment for that. We already have an environment that does that and has all the DLP policies set up for that environment. Use this one, here's access instead of building a new one. Usually works 9 times out of 10, but again, dev test production environments for business specific groups or applications, and individual use environments for POCs and trainings. The community plans is what that recalls. Okay, Johnny, what is DLP policy, right? Data loss prevention. Here's some of the key facts. So these DLP policies enforce rules which connectors can be used together. So if it enforces rules for which connectors can be used together. And we'll go into that in a second. So connectors are classified as either business data only, or no business data allowed, or blocked. So there's 3 classifications for the connectors. A connector in the business data only group can only be used with other connectors from that same group for apps and flows. There's no cross-group connectors that can work in the DLP policies. Tenant admins can define policies that apply to all environments, and then non-Microsoft connectors can be fully blocked using policy. So you might have company policies where I can't connect data to LinkedIn, I can't connect data to Twitter, to Outlook.com, to Slack, those different types of things. We don't want anyone to be able to connect to those types of data that are not trusted, let's say first-party Microsoft connectors. So we block those, and we don't allow users to connect. So again, those connectors are, they could be open source. We don't want them in an environment, those different types of things. So this is what the DLP policy does. It applies rules and enforces rules for which connectors can be used together. Okay, so here are some, when you set up the data loss prevention policies, firstly, create a policy spanning all environments that block all unsupported non-Microsoft connectors and classifies all Microsoft connectors as business data. So what I mean by that is we want to create a policy that goes across all environments that allows only Microsoft connectors access to talk to each other. So for example, SharePoint and OneDrive, Flow Power Apps, Flow to SharePoint, Flow to OneDrive, those different types of things. The interconnectivity, so email to Flow. You want those first-party Microsoft connectors to be able to talk to each other. So that's the first thing I would do, is block unsupported non-Microsoft connectors across all the environments. Next thing you do is create a policy for the default environment and other training environments that further restrict the Microsoft connectors, which are classified as business data. So what that does is it restricts the business data connectors and then only gives you the Office 365 connectors that are allowed. What that does is, you don't want, you want to have a subset of DLP policies to allow users to only connect to certain things for training and those different types of things for POCs. And then number 3, create additional policies to exclude those environments from policy number 1 and number 2 that pertain to certain connectors that can be used for specific environments. So this is the approved custom connectors, and you're like, okay, Johnny, what are approved custom connectors? These are certain connectors for certain application environments. So for example, if I wanted to connect to ServiceNow, or if I wanted to connect to SAP, or if I wanted to connect to SQL, or some of those other ones that require more attention or licensing or those different types of things, bring those down to a certain policy where you allow certain environments to connect to those. That way, you have that subset of control where you don't have data loss within the environment itself. So all those approved custom connectors have its own DLP policy. So there's 3 ways right there that you can protect your data and set up DLP policies. Okay, so let's monitor your tenant's activity. So how do we do that? Log and analytics. So there's log and analytics available for Power Apps and Flow. If you go to protection.office.com, that's the Security and Compliance Center. Audit records are stored in there. So you must have an Office 365 E3 or greater license, and this must be enabled at the organizational level. So if this is not enabled at the organizational level for the log and analytics, it doesn't work. So this provides, Office does provide an API to query this data, which is currently used by many vendors, but use the activity logging data for reporting. So some of the actions, like for example, the things that get captured in these logs are people when a flow is created, when it's deleted, edited, when it's shared, when it started a paid trial, when it's renewed a paid trial, those different types of things. And same thing for Power Apps. When someone launches the app, this is stored in the Security and Compliance Center. Marking apps as featured, editing app permissions, deleting apps, all these activities are stored in the audit logs for further capture. There are some admin analytics available in the Admin Center. If you go to the Power Platform Admin Center, you can see that there are tenant and environmental level analytics. So available from the Admin Center, you can access. Access is available for all environment admin. So if you're an environment admin, you can go to the Power Platform Admin Center and see the analytics for your environment specifically. This data is stored for 28 days and is refreshed daily. So some of the things that you can see on the Power Platform Admin Center analytics is capacity management. So how much data do you have in your tenant for things like CDS and other apps and flows? You can look at the common data service capacity. And also you can look at the Power Apps and Power Automate analytics as well. So I can go and look at specific analytics around users opening, how many times this app's been opened, those different types of things. So that data is stored into the Power Platform Admin Center. Okay, so we have a few more minutes. I'm going to try to rush through this real quick. Alert and activity. So this is, so you can use PowerShell. PowerShell as a powerful reporting tool for management of connectors. So there's PowerShell commandlets out there that you can actually go into it and deploy connectors to DLP policies, those different types of things. There's some flexibility around that. There are three components of that. So there's a Power Platform for admins, Power Automate Management, Power Apps for admins, and Power Apps for app makers as well. One of the things that you can do is establish and automate your audit process. Create your own workflow using the management connector. So Microsoft gives you a template. So the COE Starter Kit comes with its own audit workflow template that can restrict app creators, that can restrict flow connectors, that can restrict app connectors, and then it can also look at newly added connectors, those different types of things. So you can do your own audit workflow and restrict behavior based on your organization's policies. So there's like some attestation process for assets in the default environment that you want to do some auditing on. You can do that yourself. And the one that is provided through the Power Apps app, the admin app, looks like this. Next thing we want to do is welcome new makers and identify champions. We talked about this before. Welcome new makers. There's in that nurturing process, detect when new flow or app is created, and an automatic email gets sent to the makers, welcoming them to the community, and telling them, hey, there's some resources and those different types of things. Here's some public resources. Invite them to the Yammer Club for the Power Platform or Power Apps or Power Automate, those different types of things. It's a really cool email. Identify champions in your organization. So have a new flow or new Power Apps or new connectors digest. Send, have it sent daily, some oversight. Hey, empower users, but also give them guidance. You know how it is when you turn something on and you don't tell anyone and people start using it, then all these things get broken and you have to pull back the security. It's better to get ahead of this and identify those champions to help you empower new users as well. This is what the out-of-the-box new Microsoft flows in a tenant looks like. So this is kind of an email that shows you some of the new flows, some of the new apps in a tenant. You can actually make this look a little bit, user friendly or easier on the eyes if you want. So in closing, in this session, we discussed the following in the COE Starter Kit. So gave you an introduction of what the COE Starter Kit was, looked at the administration, the governance, and the nurture components. Best practices, we looked at the best practices for installing the COE Starter Kit. And then also we looked at some operational strategies built by experience and usage of the COE Starter Kit. And with that said, thank you. I'm going to go back to the survey slide as quickly as I can. So you guys, if you guys want to do this, so please fill out the survey. I should have put this at the end. I apologize for that. And if you have any questions that we can't talk about today, please tweet me the question, write me on LinkedIn. Be happy to help answer any questions for you guys. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the Microsoft 365 virtual